My name is Laurence Hewson. I am the guitarist, pianist, and singer of Sordid Ordeal. Our debut album, When I Left Town, has just come out. Get around it and give it a listen. You're hearing me here on Heavy Mag with Kris.
Beautiful, brother. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, as you say, mate, Sordid Ordeal today release your debut album, When I Left Town. So, how does it feel to have it finally unleashed on the world and out there?
Oh, mate, I can't even begin to tell you how long I have waited for this moment. in the time this band has been together, we've had like 20 or 30 mates bands all put out multiple records and then break up and look back on a successful career in the time that we've been working on this. So it's been a long road in, but it is a massive release to smash this one out of the chamber. Like, tracks on this were on previous demos and EPs that we had done, and this, I feel, we have finally attained the sound that we've always wanted to have. This is the lineup I've always dreamed of for this band, and so yeah, it's all that. I'm actually kind of glad that it took so long, because if I'd done it under previous lineups or under previous circumstances, it wouldn't have sounded or been the way I wanted it to be. Like, this is it. This is a true representation of what I think this band should have always been.
Shit hard. And so, tell us a bit more about the album from a musical point of view and what you're going for with it.
So, the whole record was created on Maiden guitars. Like, to me, this record is supposed to have that quintessential cutting, biting Australian sound. When I think of like Australian music, when I think of Australian bands and classic Australian records, I think of these weird kind of idiosyncrasies that make our music unique compared to like rock coming out of the UK or rock coming out of the US. And when I think of Australian music, I think of like the Drones and Hoodlum Shouts and like, Akadaka and just a lot of that, hard rock biting stuff. But, I like, I'm a big fan of Poison City Records period from like the 2000s up until the 20 teens, and, I think of a lot of feedback and heavy distortion, but it's not sound gated. It has a really natural sound to it. And, like, when you listen to the song Confession, you can actually hear me rocking back and forth on the piano stool while I'm playing the song. And that was recorded in a church in Carlton. And, like the mixers and then the producers asked, do you want to pull that out or sound gate it? And I went, no, absolutely not. Like, leave that in there. That's what makes it such a natural sounding record. And we didn't, even with the recording of like the big fat rhythm guitars and stuff, there are moments where the chord, rings out past the point that it would normally musically make sense for it to stop. And I hit the pedal like, deliberately after the point so that we cover that period, and then they could have cut it if they wanted to. And then I go, nah, just like leave all that distortion in there, leave the mess in there. It's got to sound like it was played by musicians, not like it was a song that was programmed into a computer and then recorded coming out of a speaker system. Like, fuck that for a joke. And so, there are going to be parts where maybe I sing slightly off key. There's going to be like guitar solo that like, decay out before the point that you wanted it to. But like, it's a real live sounding record, which is funny because like you've got a 12-piece choir in there as well. And there's a string quintet in there. And then there's a trad Irish band came in and played on some of the tracks, fiddle and uilleann pipes. The uilleann being the Irish Gaelic word for elbow, like, because they're not like that. Where you blow into, you're playing by pumping the elbow on them. Like, it's got all that high production stuff in it, but the underlying floor tracks of everything is just live as fuck sounding and raggedy, like that really cutting sort of almost Guns N' Roses level of distorted rhythm guitars and stuff.
Yeah. And you've released the singles Citizen, A Purely Genetic Connection, Confession, and Black Straps, mate. So if that's all that someone's heard of your music, would you say they're a good sonic representation of the album as a whole?
I reckon, yeah. I reckon Citizen is a great representation of like a whole sort of political, aggressive, punky side to us. And we used to be way more punk. Like back in, this band started in 2010, and from 2010 to 2017, it was really punky. So Citizen kind of retains that really sort of punky sound. Black Straps is like a perfect representation of that blues rock kind of like really bluesy, dirgy, grungy kind of sound. Confession is an excellent representation of like that big orchestral Meatloaf influenced, Bruce Springsteen influenced, like massive sounding arrangement. And I suppose Genetic Connections goes a bit more like with Black Straps, is that like chugging bluesy hard rock kind of pub rock kind of sound. So all four of those songs, I think, capture very stark elements of Sordid Ordeal. And when people listen to the other songs on the album that weren't released as singles, you'll probably look at, Trinity Tirade and put that in the confession basket, and listen to Mishka and put that in the in the Citizen basket and stuff. But like, yeah, I think that's why those four singles, it made sense to us to release those, because they were the ones that I think really nailed each different corner of the band as it stands at the moment.
So When I Left Town is the first of a two-part coming-of-age story, mate. So can you elaborate on that concept a bit for us?
Yeah, I can. I love concept albums. I love rock opera. I like big, ambitious production. And, in my teenage years, I was obsessed with Pink Floyd and then Tommy's The Who. I fucking loved My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade. I love Green Day's American Idiot. Like, Dark Side of the Moon, The Wall, and then the film The Wall. Like, I love to blend all those elements of like big fucking storytelling. It might be like the sort of the Celtic side of my influences and stuff as well, in that like everything's a bit ballady and everything's got sort of a basis in a story. But when we first started recording it, I envisioned it as being like a CD released album, and you can fit 80 minutes of music on a CD easy. And so it was like, it was like 14 or 15 tracks long or something. And then vinyl started to make its comeback, and I thought, you know what, I would love to release a vinyl record. And then, when we sort of cut the songs in chronological order of the way that they take place, it filled up 2 full vinyls. And I was like, well, fuck, maybe we should just release this as part 1 and part 2. Because I want to experience my music the way that some of my favorite, artists of all time experience their music. Like feeling coming out with the warmth of vinyl and, hearing the crackle of the needle hitting the wax. Like, I want to feel that stuff. And it, some people write it off as wank, and they're just like, oh, just get with the times, mate. Just release it digitally or put it on a CD. But like, I'm a bit of a romantic for that old stuff. I want to feel that stuff. I want to have those experiences. Even bands as late as like Metallica and Nirvana got to experience in the early 90s, before CDs really just dominated everything. So yeah, releasing it as part 1, where, I leave Wagga Wagga in New South Wales as an 18-year-old and come down to Melbourne and like, just sort of hit in the face by going to uni and political movements and going to bars and being introduced to the Melbourne club scene, and just things were very, done very differently in metropolitan Melbourne in the mid 2000s to the way that they were done in Wagga Wagga in New South Wales. Like, it was a total flood of the senses in every sense, like, booze, sexually, drugs, like the whole thing. It was just so overwhelming. And I like that I can tell this story in a retrospective sense. Because a lot of the songs are written from that period, and I've revisited them and changed them slightly, so that as a 35-year-old man, I can put out this record, the way that I experienced it, but like hundreds of thousands of kids across the country have experienced it since the 70s, 80s, 90s. Like that story of, the kid who grows up into the country and then moves to the city to either, crack into music or art or go to university or whatever. It's just such a played out sort of coming of age story in Australia, and it's not like America, where for every regional area, there is a massive city there, like within 100 miles. Australia is sparse as fuck. We've got maybe 6 major cities spread out across one of the largest countries on the planet. But the rural area is extensive as fuck. So there's something so much more intimidating about the distance you travel, like to go to a metropolitan area when you're emerging as a kid coming from, you know, a regional area. I think this record captures that, and walking through it step by step, going into relationships, coming out of relationships, you know, discovering your people. You know, when you're just like, you grow up in the country, you're mates with the people you find that are there. But then sometimes when you move to the city, you find your people and you're like, holy shit, this is the community I've always craved and I've always wanted. This record paints all that stuff. So that's why it's a big story. There are a lot of concepts to take. I wanted to experience vinyl, and so that's why we did it as that part 1 and part 2. So album 1 is called When I Left Town. Album 2 is going to be called Nothing Was the Same Again.
Right, yeah. Very cool.
And I want to be able to hold them up next to each other, and you can read it straight across the covers eventually. And yeah.
Well, I got to say too, man, I love your confidence. Like, a lot of bands release their debut album and they chuck it out and they go, oh yeah, we'll see how that goes before we do another one. But you're like, fuck this shit, I got 2 straight up on releasing. I don't give a fuck how the first one goes, I'm releasing 2. I love it.
Man, unlike a lot of bands, I've had a lot of time to think about
them. And you mentioned before too that you've got like the 12-piece choir in there. There's a brass ensemble, a string quartet, the Celtic band. Like, how did you manage to bring so many different sounds together and still have the album sound cohesive?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think without sounding like a total fart sniffing wanker, I think it really is just the fact that it's authentic. Like, it comes from a place where my musical taste is eclectic as fuck. Like, I'll go from, you know, listening to King Parrot to listening to like trad Celtic sessions and reels and jigs in the space of an afternoon, you know. And so when you're so authentically and honestly into all these different elements of music, and you're in music in a way that it could accommodate any of that stuff, when you bring it together, it just works. And like, there's no formula for it. I don't even know how we pulled it off. Literally, mate of mine, Phil DiCarlo from the Cigarillos, said to me, he got pissed the other night, and he said to me, okay, I've got to be honest with you. Over the last few years, when all the posts were going up on socials about the brass section coming in and the strings coming in, the Celtic fucking, you know, stuff coming in, I just went, he's overcooked it. This is going to sound shit. Like, I've been going to watch this band my whole, you know, the last 10 years. I've seen it in, you know, like, I've seen it as a 3-piece. I've seen it as a hard rock 5-piece. Like, but with all of these elements going into it, he's cooked it. It's gone too far. Like, it's just going to be, yeah. And like, it just, I love that he came out and he said that to me. And I was like, yeah, wow. Like, you know, maybe I just got lucky that it worked. But also, if there is a secret to Sordid Ordeal's songwriting, it's that there is so much room and space in the songs. It's not written around really tight riffs, and it's not written around big, elaborate sort of meandering riffs the way that you might have Tool, where, you know, the riffage itself is complicated and needs to be accommodated by the other instruments in the band. It's big and it's chordy. It takes a lot of influence from country music as well when you think about it. And having all that space in there means, what did they used to say about the Tirana? When they released the Tirana, they had a little 6-cylinder motor in it, but there was all this space under the bonnet, so you could throw anything in there that you wanted. Sordid Ordeal's songwriting is like a Tirana. It's when you open the bonnet up, the motor's there, but if you want to throw a supercharger in there, if you want to throw a fucking NOS canister in there, there is room for all of that. And so that's what we did. We just chucked stuff in there, and it fucking worked. I don't know if I could do it again.
Now, in the press release, I'm not sure if this was actually part of the press release or if Chris Marek wrote it, that describes you as Ned Kelly meets Paul Hogan meets Paul Kelly. Like, that's a pretty full-on mix to live up to, bro.
They weren't my words. That's definitely Kris doing that. I didn't. Yeah. Yeah, no, look, they're big boots to fill, and it's a good thing that I've got a size 14 foot.
Shit. Now, the story of Sordid Ordeal is a classic Aussie battler tale, mate. So the band formed back in 2010 when you were all university dropouts. So it's not a bad starting point for a band.
I think it's very, I think it's typical of a lot of bands. I don't think it's as dignified as a lot of other bands, but like we all met at uni, and I think all of us dropped out at some point. But there was me and another guy, and we started the band together, and we realized that our musical inclinations, our songwriting was too different to exist within the same band, and so we went our separate ways. He became the drummer in my band. And then my bass player, I played bass in his band as well. So it was one of those classic things where you've got 8 musos in a community together and 3 full bands came out of it and everyone's playing in each other's bands. And I love that because I interviewed Tom Lincoln from The Nation Blue a few years ago, and he said that's what the music scene in Hobart was like in the 90s. There was 100 people living in town and about 500 bands came out of it. And everybody was playing all in each other's bands and stuff. And I was like, that is a very Australian thing, especially in a rural area. And I think there are a lot of times I still feel like Melbourne isn't quite a city. It's just a really big country town. But, we made it work. So we got together, and I think we didn't really quite know what the music was that we wanted to create. I know how I wanted my songwriting to sound, but I was still finding my voice. Those first few years that we were together, I was listening to a lot of like 90s grunge and stuff. And as a result, I definitely developed a bit of an Aberdeen, Washington state drawl, to some of my singing and stuff, but was also listening to a lot of Radiohead as well. And so like I was cleaning out my accent a bit and sounding almost like Southern English. And it was just like, I hadn't yet found like my version of authenticity. I didn't yet realize that you could sing with a thick Murrumbidgee accent and that, it would embody nearly everything about it. And all of a sudden the pieces would fall into place. Those first 7 or 8 years that we were together, we holed ourselves up in Brunswick in the northern suburbs here in Melbourne. And we're just playing the Brunswick Hotel recently, the Bendigo Hotel, the Tote on Sunday afternoons upstairs, like whatever gig we could get. The really early days, we played a few, band competitions before we realized that was just a way that producers and promoters line their pockets with the ignorance of young bands and stuff. That's that old story. But you still go through a few of those and you learn what works and what doesn't. I learned, from playing those early band competitions not to turn up to the show with one lead. You're like, for the first time ever, like jumped up into the air, tucked my knees underneath my body, landed on my knees, but the bottom of the guitar hit the floor and broke the jack off inside the fucking guitar. Oh, no. And had to grab a pair of pliers from outside, pull the thing out. And the only lead I had left was a little practice lead that was only about 4 feet long. So I had to play the rest of the set, stood right next to the amp and pull the microphone back, towards the back of the stage, while the drummer and the bass player are playing well in front of me. Like, just shit like that, when you're working out what works and what doesn't and going through the minutiae of your setup. Yeah, it was just a wild old time. And there were nights when I'd play a solo across the bar at the Brunny and, turn around and accidentally knock your headstock through, 5 rows of wine glasses and crap. Like, yeah, it was just a lot of that wild stuff going on and not enough organization, not enough administration being done, like not knowing how to promote a record or how to organize recording sessions and stuff properly. But 2018 was when we really knuckled down and I went, okay, if I'm going to do something with this, I've got to get into it now, like not just keep running around and smashing beers.
And you mentioned before, bro, you got an album launch party coming up. What's the details on that?
We actually had that last week. It was, sorry, hang on. You can edit that part out. I got confused. I was thinking about the listening party. The album launch party. So that's coming up at Shot Kickers in Thornbury. I love these venues in Melbourne that are now artist run. Like, especially playing at a venue with Matthias from Child in it, and I was watching Child at Cherry years ago when, the fucking song Trees would kick in and then you just get smashed in the face by Doom Blues and stuff. Like, the fact that these guys are going out and running venues themselves so that musicians are being treated in an ethical way. Like, I couldn't think of a better venue to get behind and want to do an album launch at. So our main support is The Currency, who are like my favorite Australian folk punk band of all time. They've been a massive influence on me over the years. Like they're one of those seminal bands that like sang in an Australian accent and sort of made me feel like it was possible. And they're the trailblazers before you, like the guys who don't think about, oh, maybe we should make it sound more American or more English to make it more marketable to overseas. These are the guys that really went out on their own and went, fuck it. Whatever happens, at least we did it in our own voice. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want to bring to music. So it's just an honor to have those guys support us. And like, I would support them for the rest of our damn life. Like they, to me, are gods and goddesses in that band. And it's just a testament to the sense of community in the Melbourne music scene that these guys who are so much more well-known than us, they've played all over the country, they've supported Dropkick Murphys and Flogging Molly, that these guys would support us, little old Sordid Ordeal from Melbourne. I've only just pulled our shit together in the last few years. So we've got Echo Social Club opening at the show, a little rock duo. We got, did you know Purple Pingers, the guy who runs shitrentals.org? Uh-huh. He's a viral sensation on Instagram because he's got this very famous Instagram page where people submit their rental properties and he just takes it to landlords and he takes it to real estates and just analyzes like what's wrong with the rental market in Australia. This guy's become like a hero of the renting working class. But I accidentally discovered that he writes his own folk songs like around like that kind of thing as well. So I reached out to him. It was just like, do you want to come and play a show with us? Because politically, we're on the same page. I fucking love what you do. So he's coming in to do that. We've got two Irish poets performing with us as well. I've run the open mic night at the Drunken Poet in West Melbourne here for the last 8 years. And I have just seen some of the best poets and performers come through. And I got a little bit nostalgic for like that, from everything from the Woodstock period to like the Manchester scene in the UK, where you wouldn't just have a rock show and it was just band, end of the night. It was like band or a poet or someone doing, art bullshit in the corner of the room and people just dropping acid and watching that happen while the band's playing in the background. I wanted to have a more immersive performer experience. I didn't just want to rely on this sort of bulldozed formula of just band. And so the poets are Hannah Kingston and Holly Hughes. The first time they came into the Drunken Poet and performed, I was blown off my fucking face. Like the way they just cut through to the truth and read is just astounding. So we first ran poets at our tour launch last year and people really enjoyed it. I'm like, well, if that was all the experimentation I needed to know, that we should be doing this. So they'll be performing either side of Purple Pingers or Jordan. Our violinist, Kat O'Gotham, her other band, the Ramshackle Army, who have been playing around, for years and years. They don't all live in the same city anymore, so they don't play as regularly. But when they are in town and the stars align, this is the first time we'll get to play with them. And I love that at previous shows, we've played with our other violinist band, Darling Vicious, Ella's band from Sydney. And now we get to play with Kat's band, the Ramshackle Army, supporting us as well. So yeah, it's just an amazing sort of array of like the community coming together, bands we've always wanted to play with. Really excited for it all.
Hell yeah, brother. Well, I hope it goes well for you, mate. But in the meantime, the album When I Left Town is out now, and I did have a listen before the interview, mate, and it was some fucking quality shit on there, bro. It's really well done. So best of luck with it.
I'm glad you like it, man.
No worries at all. And I might, if I pass through Richmond Station tomorrow, mate, I'll pop in and bring you a beer.
Come and say hi. Don't let the manager see you give me a beer.
What time are you working?
I'll be working from 4 o'clock in the Arvo till midnight, and that's all 3 nights of the Taylor Swift shows.
Sweet as well. Yeah, we'll be.
I'm anticipating at some point she's going to want to come down and get an autograph from me.
Well, I'll tell her that I've got your number, and I'll tell her that I might be able to line her up.
You let me know.
All right, Brian. Nice to meet you, mate. Hopefully we catch up for a beer soon.
Lovely to meet you too. Thank you so much for everything.
My pleasure, bro. Take care.